AMC Javelin launched in 1968 as a proper pony car competitor to the Mustang and the Camaro. It was good-looking, reasonably quick, and gave AMC something they desperately needed, which was a seat at the performance table. Then, also in 1968, AMC took that Javelin body and created the two-seat AMX, a shorter, more aggressive machine that was genuinely trying to compete with the Corvette. 2 seats, a shorter wheelbase, and enough attitude to make Chevrolet at least mildly nervous. Here is where it gets interesting. The two-seat AMX lasted exactly 3 model years, 1968, 1969, and 1970. Sales were never spectacular. AMC was spending money they frankly did not have to maintain 2 separate performance models, and the accountants were getting increasingly loud about it. So, the standalone 2-seat AMX was canceled. But AMC's product planners were not ready to let that name die. The AMX badge carried genuine racing credibility by this point, earned on tracks across America. Throwing it away entirely felt like burning down a house you just spent years building. So they made a decision that sounds simple but was actually quite radical. They merged the AMX identity into the Javelin. Starting in 1971, the Javelin AMX became a single model, a 4-seat pony car wearing the performance badge of a machine that no longer existed in its original form. It was a resurrection and a reinvention happening simultaneously. AMC gave the Javelin AMX a wider body, a more aggressive front fascia with a distinctive twin venturi hood scoop, bold body side stripes, and enough visual muscle to announce its intentions from 2 blocks away. And here is the secret within the secret. By combining the 2 models, AMC actually freed up engineering and marketing resources that allowed them to make the Javelin AMX genuinely better than either of its predecessors had been. Necessity forced brilliance. The car that was born from cancellation and compromise ended up being the most complete performance machine AMC ever put on the street. Nobody planned it that way. It just happened. And that, right there, is pure American Motors magic. Secret number 2. Pierre Cardin designed the interior. Go ahead and read that heading again. Take your time, we will wait. Yes, Pierre Cardin, the French fashion designer whose name appeared on everything from suits to cologne to, apparently, muscle car interiors. In 1971, AMC became the first American automobile manufacturer to collaborate with a high-fashion designer on a production vehicle's interior. And the designer they chose was not some obscure name from the fringes of the industry. This was Pierre Cardin, one of the most recognizable names in global fashion. Now, before you start imagining a muscle car upholstered in something you'd find on a Parisian runway, let's talk about what this actually meant in practice. The Pierre Cardin edition, Javelin AMX, featured a genuinely striking interior. The seats were done in a black and silver geometric pattern that looked like it had been beamed in from 1985. Bold, angular, and completely unlike anything else you could find in an American car in 1971. The door panels carried the same geometric treatment. The headrests were embroidered with the Pierre Cardin logo, and the whole cabin had an almost futuristic quality that made the interiors of competing muscle cars look like they had been designed by someone's accountant. Here is why this matters beyond the novelty factor. AMC was fighting for attention in a market dominated by manufacturers with vastly superior budgets. They could not out-advertise General Motors. They could not out-engineer Chrysler on a dollar-for-dollar basis. But they could be interesting. They could be different. And partnering with one of the world's most famous designers gave them a story that no Camaro or Mustang could tell. Automotive journalists who had largely written off AMC as a footnote suddenly had something genuinely surprising to write about. The Pierre Cardin Javelin AMX made the pages of publications that would not normally give AMC the time of day, and it attracted buyers who cared about individuality, which was exactly the kind of buyer AMC needed to reach. Only around 4,500 Pierre Cardin edition Javelins were produced across the model run. Today, finding one with the original interior intact is like finding a 4-leaf clover inside a winning lottery ticket. They are extraordinarily rare, and the ones that survive are among the most visually distinctive American muscle cars of the entire era. Secret number 3. The 401 was a flat-out lie on paper. Here is a name you need to remember, the AMC 401 cubic inch V8. And here is the first thing you need to know about it. The factory horsepower rating was, to put it politely, a work of creative fiction. AMC officially rated the 401 at 330 horsepower. In 1971, the automotive industry had recently shifted from gross horsepower ratings to net ratings, which measured power with all the accessories attached and the exhaust restrictions in place. The numbers looked smaller on paper. Manufacturers across Detroit were all dealing with this transition, and many of them simply listed conservative numbers to keep insurance companies and regulators from getting too excited. The 401 was making considerably more than 330 horsepower, and the people building it knew it. Independent dyno tests of the period routinely showed the engine producing numbers well north of that official figure, particularly with the factory 4-barrel carburetor breathing freely and the exhaust system doing its job properly. But the real story of the 401 is not just about raw power output, it is about torque. The engine produced 430 lb-ft of torque, a number that tells you everything you need to know about how this engine actually felt to drive. You did not need to wind it up to a screaming redline to feel what it could do. This was an engine that hit you hard from low in the rev range and simply refused to stop pulling. On the street, in real-world driving conditions, that kind of torque delivery is what separates cars that feel fast from cars that are fast. Pairing the 401 with AMC's close ratio 4-speed manual transmission turned the Javelin AMX into something that could embarrass machinery with far more glamorous reputations. Quarter-mile times in the 13-second range were achievable bone stock, with trap speeds approaching 105 miles per hour. And yet, because the number on the spec sheet said 330 horsepower, and because the badge said AMC rather than Chevrolet or Ford, people at the stoplight would pull up beside a 401 Javelin AMX and genuinely think they had an easy target. That mistake only needed to be made once. Secret number 4. It beat the Mustang and Camaro in Trans Am racing. This is the one that makes Camaro and Mustang fans deeply uncomfortable, and frankly, we are going to linger here for a moment because it deserves the attention. The Trans Am racing series of the late 1960s and early 1970s was the proving ground for pony cars. If you wanted to establish that your street machine was a genuine performance vehicle and not just a styling exercise, you went racing in Trans Am. Ford was there with the Mustang, Chevrolet was there with the Camaro, Pontiac showed up with the Firebird, and AMC, with considerably less money than any of those manufacturers, showed up with the Javelin. In 1971, the AMC Javelin won the Trans Am Manufacturers' Championship. Not second place, not a respectable showing, the championship. This was not a fluke or a technicality, or a year when all the serious competition happened to break down. This was the result of a genuine, committed racing program that outperformed Chevrolet and Ford at their own game. And they did it again in 1972. Back-to-back Trans Am Manufacturers' Championships, against the Mustang, against the Camaro, with a budget that would have made the engineers at General Motors laugh out loud if anyone had shown it to them. The racing Javelins were not stock cars bolted to a roll cage. They were purpose-built race machines. But the engineering lessons learned on those tracks fed directly back into the street versions. The suspension tuning, the handling balance, the chassis development. All of it benefited from AMC's racing program in ways that showed up in what regular buyers drove home from the dealership. The 1971 Javelin AMX handled with a composure and balance that surprised everyone who expected AMC to build a car that only went straight. It could carry speed through corners. It responded to the driver, and on a winding road, it would make the occupants of a Camaro or a Mustang work considerably harder than they expected. None of that happened by accident. It happened because AMC went racing and actually won. Secret number 5. The Go package was a sleeper weapon. Every manufacturer had their performance packages in the muscle car era. Chevrolet had the SS, Pontiac had the Ram Air, Ford had the Cobra Jet, and AMC, with their characteristic genius for naming things in the most straightforward way imaginable, had the Go package. No poetry, no mythology, just Go. The Go package for the 1971 Javelin AMX was one of the most comprehensive factory performance upgrades available on any pony car of the era, and almost nobody outside of serious AMC enthusiasts knows it exists. This package was not just a sticker and a badge, it was a genuine mechanical transformation. The Go package included the 401 cubic inch V8 with the 4-barrel carburetor, the twin Venturi functional hood scoop that actually fed cold air into the engine, a heavy-duty suspension with handling-specific spring rates and shock tuning, a front anti-roll bar, power front disc brakes, and a limited slip differential in the rear. You also got the Hurst-shifted 4-speed manual gearbox, rally stripes, and handling tires mounted on styled steel wheels. Taken together, this was a package that addressed almost every weak point that muscle cars of the era typically suffered from. The brakes were genuine. The suspension was tuned for the real world. The limited slip differential meant that power actually went where you pointed the car, rather than entertaining the rear tire on the driver's side while the other one watched. Here is what makes this genuinely remarkable. A fully loaded Javelin AMX with the Go package cost significantly less than a comparable Camaro SS or Mustang Mach-1 with equivalent equipment. AMC was essentially giving away performance because they needed every sale they could get. Their desperation was the buyer's advantage. Cars ordered with the full Go package today represent some of the most genuinely capable factory muscle cars of the entire 1971 model year. And because everyone was busy looking at the Camaros and the Mustangs, most people had absolutely no idea what they were standing next to. Secret number 6, Mark Donohue, was the secret ingredient. If you know the name Mark Donohue, you already understand why this matters. If you don't, allow a brief introduction, because this man's connection to the Javelin AMX is one of the most fascinating threads in the entire story. Mark Donohue was one of the greatest American racing drivers of his generation. He was methodical, technically brilliant, and possessed of an engineering mind that made him as valuable in the garage as he was behind the wheel. He drove for Roger Penske's team, and when Penske brought AMC into the Trans Am series, Donohue became the man responsible for turning the Javelin into a race winner. What Donohue brought to the Javelin program was not just driving talent, it was systematic engineering development that most factory racing programs of the era did not practice with anything like his level of rigor. He tested obsessively. He documented everything. He understood the relationship between chassis setup and lap time with a precision that was genuinely ahead of its time. The handling characteristics that ended up in the street Javelin AMX were directly influenced by what Donohue and the Penske team learned on the racetrack. The suspension geometry, the weight distribution philosophy, the approach to front-to-rear brake bias. These were not decisions made by committee in a conference room. They were conclusions drawn from data collected at racing speed on real circuits. Donohue also served as something of an unofficial ambassador for the Javelin to the automotive press. When one of the most respected racing drivers in America told journalists that the Javelin was a genuinely capable machine, it carried a credibility that no advertising campaign could manufacture. He believed in the car because he had helped build it into something worth believing in. The Penske-Donohue connection gave AMC a legitimacy in performance circles that their budget alone never could have purchased. And the 1971 Javelin AMX that sat in showrooms was measurably better because of everything those two men poured into the racing program that shares its name. Secret number 7. AMC couldn't afford to build it properly. And that made it better. This sounds like a contradiction. Stick with us because it is actually one of the most instructive stories in the history of American performance cars. AMC's engineering budget was genuinely embarrassingly small compared to the resources available to GM, Ford, or Chrysler. They could not afford redundancy. They could not afford to develop multiple engine families, multiple platform architectures, or the kind of extensive testing programs that their larger competitors took for granted. Every dollar spent on the Javelin AMX was a dollar that had to earn its keep. What this forced AMC's engineers to do was prioritize with a ruthlessness that their better-funded competitors never had to develop. They could not make the car heavier to solve a problem. They could not throw money at an issue by adding complexity. They had to find the elegant solution, the one that worked correctly the first time, because there was no budget for a second attempt. The result was a car with a genuinely well-resolved chassis, The Javelin AMX was not over-engineered in the way that occasionally makes a car feel confused about its own identity. It was lean. Every component was there because it needed to be there, and it was calibrated to work with the components around it rather than against them. The 401 engine itself benefited from this philosophy. AMC had been developing their V8 architecture since the early 1960s, and by 1971, they knew it intimately. They understood its strengths, they understood its limits, and they had optimized it within those parameters to a degree that larger manufacturers sometimes failed to achieve with newer, more complex power plants. There is a reason that engineers who have worked across multiple manufacturers often speak about the satisfaction of doing a great deal with very little. The Javelin AMX is a textbook example of that principle applied to an entire automobile. Constraints, when they are severe enough, have a way of producing clarity, and the Javelin AMX is a clearer, more purposeful machine than its production circumstances had any right to produce. Secret number 8. The Javelin AMX had a dual exhaust hidden identity crisis. This one is a little quirky, and we think that is exactly why it deserves its own chapter. The 1971 Javelin AMX was sold in multiple configurations, with varying levels of performance equipment, and one of the ways buyers could spec the car created a situation that has confused AMC enthusiasts for decades. Certain Javelin AMX models left the factory with exhaust systems that exited through the rear valance in a configuration that looked virtually identical to competing muscle cars of the period. Standard stuff, nothing to write home about. But cars equipped with specific performance packages could be ordered with a side exit exhaust configuration that routed the pipes out through the lower body sides ahead of the rear wheels. Now, here is where it gets interesting. The documentation surrounding exactly which packages included which exhaust routing, and in which markets, and under which ordering combinations, is genuinely incomplete. Production records from AMC in this period were not maintained with the obsessive detail that Chevrolet or Ford applied to their documentation, which means that authenticating a Javelin AMX today often requires a level of detective work that goes well beyond consulting a build sheet. For collectors, this is simultaneously maddening and fascinating. It means that two Javelin AMXs sitting side by side, both appearing essentially identical, might have entirely different factory specifications beneath the surface. And without the paperwork to prove it, establishing exactly what left the factory in, exactly what configuration requires genuine expertise. The irony is that AMC's relatively casual approach to production documentation, born partly from the chaos of running a small manufacturer under constant financial pressure, has made their cars among the most interesting to research and authenticate in the entire muscle car hobby. There are still discoveries being made, there are still combinations being documented for the first time. In a hobby where most of the major mysteries were solved decades ago, the Javelin AMX still has secrets left to give up. Secret number 9. It was killed by a fuel crisis, not by the competition. Here is perhaps the saddest truth about the Javelin AMX. It did not lose the muscle car wars. It got caught in a natural disaster. By 1971 and 1972, the Javelin AMX was genuinely competitive. The racing success was real. The street performance was real. The value proposition compared to its competitors was genuinely remarkable. AMC had built something that deserved to succeed, and the sales numbers, while never matching Chevrolet or Ford, were moving in the right direction. Then, 1973 happened. The Arab oil embargo sent fuel prices through the roof and sent the entire American performance car market into a tailspin from which it would not fully recover for over a decade. Suddenly, nobody was buying muscle cars, not from Chevrolet, not from Ford, not from Pontiac. The entire segment collapsed almost overnight, and manufacturers across Detroit began the process of strangling their performance engines with emissions equipment and detuning them into submission. AMC, with their perpetually thin margins and their complete absence of the financial cushion that allowed GM and Ford to absorb the shock and wait for better times, simply could not sustain the Javelin program through the crisis. The Javelin continued through the 1974 model year, but the performance spirit had been gutted by emissions requirements and the commercial reality of a market that no longer wanted what the car was built to provide. The Javelin was discontinued after 1974, and with it went the AMX name, the racing program, and one of the most genuinely interesting chapters in American performance car history. What makes this particularly poignant is the timing. The Javelin AMX was hitting its stride precisely when the world pulled the rug out from under the entire category. It is the automotive equivalent of a band releasing their best album the week the record industry collapsed. The talent was there. The moment was not. Secret number 10. The legacy that nobody talks about. We have spent this entire video talking about a car that most people have forgotten. Why does the 1971 AMC Javelin AMX deserve to be remembered? Not out of sympathy, not because underdogs automatically deserve celebration, but because the Javelin AMX represents something genuinely important about what American performance cars can be when the people building them have more passion than resources and more conviction than comfort. Every major manufacturer in the muscle car era had advantages that AMC could only dream about. Deeper engineering departments, larger dealer networks, marketing budgets that dwarfed AMC's entire annual revenue. And yet, in 1971, the car that AMC built was competitive with everything those advantages produced. In some respects, it was better. The chassis was better balanced than most people gave it credit for. The engine was more capable than the official numbers suggested. The interior, in Pierre Cardin trim, was more distinctive than anything a Camaro or Mustang buyer could walk into a showroom and find. And on the racetrack, the results are not a matter of opinion. The trophies exist. The championship records exist. They do not lie. Today, a clean documented 1971 Javelin AMX with the 401 and the Go package represents extraordinary value compared to the muscle car royalty that commands six-figure prices at auction. They are out there. They are findable. And the people who find them are discovering something that the mainstream muscle car hobby has been asleep on for 50 years. More than the value proposition, more than the racing history, more than the Pierre Cardin interior, or the deceptive horsepower rating, or the Mark Donohue connection. The Javelin AMX matters because it proves that the best car in the room is not always the one with the most famous name above the door. AMC built something remarkable with almost nothing. They raced it against the best in the country and won. They dressed it in fashion-forward style when everyone else was playing it safe. And then, the world moved on and forgot almost all of it. Consider this your reminder. And that is the story of the 1971 AMC Javelin AMX. 10 secrets hiding inside a car that most of the world walked right past. If this changed how you think about American motors, or if you have always known the Javelin deserved better and you have just been waiting for someone else to say it out loud, drop it in the comments below. And if you love stories about the muscle cars that history forgot, the ones that were too fast, too interesting, or just too overlooked to get their due, hit that subscribe button. Because we are just getting started.